Welcome to my tutorial on cold starting the Harrier. First of all, I'm going to do a normal cold start procedure. Then afterwards, I'll try to scramble the aircraft and get airborne within 90 seconds. Before we jump in, let's take a quick look at the settings. There are three options for INS. We can have it unaligned, saved heading only, or pre-aligned. I will be using unaligned. So for a cold start from an airfield, we'll need to do a full alignment. Okay, with that, let's jump on board and take a look. So here we are at Incirlik in Turkey. And before we start, I would say that there isn't a strict order for everything to be done, but it's good to do it in a certain repeatable order that you're comfortable with. And for me, I generally try to go clockwise around the cockpit as much as possible. I find that if you dart around the cockpit left to right and backwards and forwards, it causes you to miss things, even if you have a list. You could use your own procedure or even follow the official NATOPS procedure, and there's a permalink to the NATOPS flight manual on my Facebook DCS pilots page, so feel free to check that out. I should also point out that there are four methods of INS alignment: ground, sea, in-flight and gyro. Gyro gives very basic information on heading and little else, but it takes no more than 45 seconds. So you might want to use that if you scramble the aircraft and then start in-flight alignment once airborne. Sea should be used on a ship that has Ship Internal Navigation System, or SINS. The Harrier has it, but I haven't tested it on other ships, but I'm pretty sure that all in-game carriers support it. In-flight alignment can obviously be used in flight, but can also be used on the ground. It's quick to do, but in real life it can take up to 10 minutes to get alignment. In DCS, the alignment normally takes under 2 minutes if you're not moving, which is actually quicker than ground alignment. If you are moving, it can take the full 10 minutes, but if you're doing cold starts, I'm guessing that you won't want to take such a shortcut. Otherwise, you'd simply start from parking hot. Finally, there's ground alignment. Now this takes a lot more effort, but in real life is how it should normally be done from a land base and when not in an emergency. So I'm going to go through the ground alignment method, but I will pause and show what you would do for C and IFA as well. So let's crack on. The first thing that I do is to turn on the battery, because the most time consuming thing is to get the INS alignment done. So we want to start that as soon as possible. How we do that depends on if we have ground power. If you do, that would be the preference, as it uses no fuel, and you'd simply request that from the ground crew via the radio menu. Here we have it available. I want to pretend that we don't, so in order to get all our systems online, we're going to need to fire up the APU. We could just start the engine, but that burns a lot of fuel, so you would normally only do that during a scramble, along with IFA. For the APU, you need to turn on both fuel pumps. However, I also turn on the digital engine control switch and a fuel cutoff lever at this point. Then we simply click on the APU and you'll hear it start up. Next, I turn on both radios, as we'll need to speak to ATC shortly, and one of the MFDs and the main panel brightness. And you might want to reset the master warning as it gets a little bit irritating. For ground alignment, we now need to enter the current location, and these steps are not needed for IFA, C or gyro alignment. To enter our current location, go to the AHSD, then Data, and then AC to enter our aircraft location data. Our location is mentioned on the kneeboard, so let's open that up. And here we can see we're at 36 degrees, 59 minutes and 39 seconds north, and 35 degrees, 24 minutes and 41 seconds east, with a magnetic variation of 4.8 degrees east. So let's put that into the ODU. Make sure you press enter after each entry. And remember the easting starts with a 0. And now click on MVAR to enter the magnetic variation. Okay, that's now done. Next, we want the wind information, so let's ask for startup and ATC will tell us the wind conditions. If we wanted, we could just enter zeros to cut a bit of a corner and save a little bit of time. So that's 2 meters per second at 196, so we'll put that in as well. So we put the direction in first, 196, click enter, and then click the ODU again to change to speed and enter 2, and then click on enter once again. Now I like to just click on the entries just to make sure that everything is in correctly. Okay, that all looks good. So now we need to start the alignment process by switching the INS mode knob to Align INS Ground. And this is where we'd select C if on a carrier or IFA if we need to do a scramble urgently. And then we'd have skipped the last few steps. The MFD should start counting at this point, and if it doesn't, the most common reason is that the parking brake isn't set. Another reason might be that you haven't entered the aircraft location correctly, so you might want to check both those items. After 65 seconds, the map should appear, at which point a countdown from 100 to 0.7 should commence, at which point the countdown will stop and it'll turn to OK. And the total time for the alignment is around 2 minutes and 50 seconds. Whilst we're waiting of alignment, we can now start our clockwise check. So we're going to start over on the lower left panel with the oxygen switch. This controls the oxygen to our face mask. Then we can set the lights as required, and I'll cover those in detail later on. Set your seat height if you wish. All of the other switches on the lower left panel should be in the correct location, but I do actually have a mod which randomly changes some switches just to keep you on your toes, and I'll put a link to that in the description. The anti-skid button helps prevent wheel lock, but it also controls the nose wheel steering gain, and it defaults to NWS. Here, your rudder pedals control your nose wheel steering, and pressing the NWS HOTAS button changes to high gain, allowing you to virtually turn on the spot, which is great for manoeuvring on the carrier, but other than that it can be tricky to control, so it shouldn't really be used over about 5 to 10 knots. Unless high gain is needed, I would always turn this from NWS to on. Here, the nose wheel is free to move with its caster, just like a shopping trolley wheel, but you can still use low gain nose wheel steering with the NWS HOTAS button. You shouldn't use the nose wheel steering at all for landings and for takeoffs when over around 40 knots or so, otherwise it's easy to lose control. And beyond 40 knots, the rudder provides sufficient control for your takeoff run. Next up is the flaps power. Turn that to on and then set the flaps themselves. Now I'd leave those as auto for a long takeoff and change to STO for a vertical or a short takeoff. Now the NATOPS procedure actually specifies leaving them on cruise until you're taxiing, but for me that's just one more thing to forget, so I do it now. Next, turn on the other MFD. Set your TACAN if required. Set the HUD brightness, and you might need to set the day or night HUD mode. Over on the right here, you can leave the EDP lighting unless it's dark, but turn on the radar warning receiver. I set that to full volume, as obviously it's quite important. Set your expendables to auto, that's your chaff and flare. If you have an ECM pod, you can set that to standby. Then down here, set your fuel bingo level. And set your altimeter to 0. That's the barometric altimeter. Set your backup ADI. Then head over to the center panel and turn on your flare and DMT. And then over on the right panel, turn up your volume control knobs. These control the very annoying sidewinder and sidearm volume, and of course bitching Betty. So I set those to halfway because they're quite loud. Then arm your seat, and finally close your cockpit. If you're doing a short takeoff from a FARB or a carrier or a vertical takeoff, you'd want to look at the VRES page. Now I've covered that in detail on my video on vertical takeoff and landings, so I'm not going to repeat that, but feel free to check it out. That covers how to calculate your takeoff parameters, including your STO stop lever setting. And of course if you need water, so set that to take off or off as required. I don't really need my STO stop, but I'm going to set it to 60 as that's what's showing on VRES at present. But as mentioned, I haven't actually calculated it here. The alignment's now complete, so we need to flick over to either nav or IFA, and you should normally select IFA. Here, the INS is tightly coupled with GPS. The aircraft still uses INS for its navigation and targeting, but GPS constantly corrects the INS location. If you set it to nav, this doesn't happen, and over time your INS will lose accuracy, and this is modelled. For navigation, this won't be significant, but it is significant for targeting, as it might easily be out by over 30 meters over the course of even a short mission. That might mean that you bombed the wrong building. With the default game settings, some aircraft can't use GPS if they're on the Red 4 site, or if the game time is set earlier than April 1994. If that's the case, then select Nav. The MFD will be in data mode, so deselect that. And personally, I never like the green controls, so I select map and then color and change the color to blue is my personal preference. And I also select OL2 to populate my route map. We're almost ready to start our engines, so let's ask the ground crew to remove the wheel chocks. Now, NATOP suggests setting the vector to 10 degrees to prevent damage to the flaps or to the tarmac with the engine running, but that's up to you as it's not modelled in DCS. Before you start, check that your throttle cutoff is on. If your throttle cutoff is off, then the engine will not start. Once confirmed, simply flick the start switch, at which point the APU will go quiet for a moment and you'll start to hear the engine spooling up. Once it reaches 9.2%, nudge the throttle to disable the throttle cutoff and return to idle. Fuel will then be added and the engine will then carry on spooling to around 30% depending on altitude. If you don't disable the throttle cutoff, you'll just hear the igniters clicking away. Once you get to around 20% RPM, the nozzles will go to their commanded position. Up until then, it'll always be at 0, no matter what the setting is. The engine's now idling, and so if you wish, you can contact ATC. Finally, turn off your parking brake and off you go.
Enfield 1-1, Kanskaya, clear to taxi to runway 5.
This time we are going to scramble the aircraft to provide urgent CAS support to friendly troops. As you can see, an A-10 has a bit of a jump start on us, but I'm sure his support will be invaluable. The bearing to target is 095, so we're going to use gyro alignment and then IFA, and hopefully we can be airborne within 90 seconds. Battery on, decks, fuel cut off, both fuel pumps, and then go for engine start. Turn on the gyro, and whilst here, the flaring and DMT, then arm the seat and close the cockpit. Clear the wheel chocks. That's all the important stuff, but we'll do as much as we can while still on the ground, starting with the oxygen. 9.2%, so just nudge the throttle. Anti-skid on, flap power on, and set flaps. Turn on both MFDs, both radials, and the main panel. bring up the AHSD, turn on the radar warning receiver and the expendables, parking brake off, and let's get rolling. Now ask for takeoff permission, and the rest of the tasks we can finalise once we're airborne, including getting the IFA alignment done. We're actually accelerating quite slow because I've got 10 rock eyes and a full fuel load, so I've not quite made the 90 seconds, but it's definitely doable. As you can see, the gyro isn't providing information to the HUD on direction, but it is providing information to the AHSD. So that allows us to point our aircraft roughly in the right direction, which I said was 95 degrees. We're now pointing roughly on target, so let's switch to IFA, and this can take up to 10 minutes, after which the INS warning will disappear and the waypoint information will be available on the AHSD and the HUD. Now just need to finish off, so our com volume, bingo fuel, map settings, I'm going to set my flaps to cruise, and that should be everything. But now is probably a good time to check that any warning lights and also to run through a checklist to make sure nothing's been missed. There are a couple of things which I haven't done, which aren't particularly important. First is the backup ADI, and secondly the barometric altimeter, but I'll set that when returning to base. Speaking of returning to base, this A10 has only managed to get 9 miles before we've caught him up. You might as well turn round and go home right now. We're now approaching 10 minutes since we selected IFA and we've just got full INS alignment. So we can now see our route map and select waypoints and hopefully find our targets. That just about wraps up this tutorial, so thank you for watching. Please do hit like and subscribe, and feel free to leave any comments or ask any questions. The boys have some beers as a thank you for the help, so I'm just off to grab a cold one. Oh, hang on, the A10 has finally arrived to save the day.